Gilles Deleuze on Palestine. The Importance of Being Arafat, 1983. The Palestinian cause is above all the sum total of the injustices that the Palestinian people has endured and continues to endure. These injustices include acts of violence, but also the illogicality born of injustice and false reasoning, and the false promises to compensate or justify those acts. Arafat had only one word for the broken promises and the forsaken commitments of the Sabra and Shatila massacres: shame. Shame. Some say it is not genocide, and yet from its very beginning, this history bears a great resemblance to Oradour. Oradour-sur-Glane is a town near Limoges, where on June 10, 1944, soldiers of the German Waffen SS killed 642 villagers, almost all of its inhabitants. The ruins of the town are still preserved today. Zionist terrorism was not only directed against the British, but against the Arab villages that had to be erased. The Irgun was very active in this regard. The Irgun was an armed branch of the extremist movement founded by Vladimir Jabotinsky, also the founder of the Likud. The Irgun, directed at the time by Menachem Begin, led actions against both the Arab-Palestinian national movement and the British administration. It was notably responsible for the massacre of a Palestinian village on the outskirts of Jerusalem in 1948 and the attack on the King David Hotel, which at the time was the seat of the British Mandate in Jerusalem. From the start, they acted not only as if the Palestinian people should no longer exist, but as if it never had existed. The conquerors had just suffered the worst genocide in history. The Zionists turned this genocide into an absolute evil. But turning the worst genocide in history into an absolute evil is a religious and mystic approach, not an historical one. It does not stop the evil. On the contrary, it propagates it, inflicting it on other innocents. It demands reparations that cause others to suffer some part of what the Jews suffered: exile, ghettoization, disappearance as a people. With colder means than genocide, they want to achieve the same ends. The United States and Europe owed reparations to the Jews, and they made a people pay for these reparations who, to say the least, had nothing to do with the Holocaust, had never even heard of it, and therefore was totally innocent. It was a grotesque and violent beginning. Zionism and then the State of Israel demanded that the Palestinians recognize their rights, yet the Israeli state had continued to deny even the fact of a Palestinian people. It does not speak of Palestinians, but of Palestinian Arabs, as if they were living there by chance or by mistake. Later, Israelis acted as if the evicted Palestinians came from abroad. They always failed to mention the first war of resistance the Palestinians waged on their own. The Palestinians were labeled heirs to Hitler, because they did not recognize Israel's rights. Then a fiction began that spread wider and wider, weighing on all of those who defended the Palestinian cause. This fiction, Israel's wager, was to call anyone who protested the de facto conditions and the actions of the Zionist state an anti-Semite. The origin of this operation lay in Israel's coldly political approach to the Palestinians. Israel never once hit its aims: to empty the Palestinian territory. They pretended as if the land was already empty, since it had always been destined for the Zionist. It was colonization, but not the 19th century kind. Instead of exploiting the country's inhabitants, they would be forced out. Those who remained would not become a workforce dependent on the land, but a temporary, detached workforce, like immigrants in a ghetto. From the beginning, the purchase of land was made with the understanding that it was empty of all inhabitants, or could be emptied. It is genocide, but genocide where physical extermination is subordinated to geographical evacuation. Being merely generic Arabs, the surviving Palestinians would disappear in the mass of Arabs. Physical extermination, be it entrusted to mercenaries or not, is perfectly present. But they say it is not genocide, since genocide is not their final goal. Indeed, it is only one of the means. The complicity of the United States with Israel does not come solely from a powerful Zionist lobby in the U.S. Elias Sandbar has shown how the United States discovered a parallel with its own history in Israel: the extermination of the Indians, which was also only in part directly physical. They also had to empty the land, as if there had never been any Indians except in the reservations, ghettos, that turned them into immigrants from within. In many ways, the Palestinians are the new Indians, the Indians of Israel. Marxist analyses indicate two complementary movements in capitalism: constantly imposing limits for itself within which it sets up and exploits its own system, and pushing back these limits, going beyond them to start its foundation again, on a larger or more intensive scale. Pushing back limits is the act of American capitalism, of the American dream. Israel has acted in kind with its dream of a greater Israel on Arab lands, a dream built on the backs of Arabs. The Palestinian people found the strength to resist, and they resisted. They became an armed nation from a people of common lineage. Landless and stateless, they have managed to form an organization that not only represents but incarnates the people. A great historical figure was needed, almost a Shakespearean figure, to speak in Western terms. This figure is Arafat. It is not the first time this has happened in history. A reference for the French would be La France Libre, although it benefited from the less popular support at first. Also, not without historical precedent. The Israelis have deliberately, knowingly destroyed every opportunity for a solution. Every chance for a possible solution. They remain entrenched in their religious position, denying not only the rights but the very fact of Palestinians. They wash their hands of their own territory by treating the Palestinians as foreign terrorists. And precisely because the Palestinians were not from abroad, but a specific people as different from other Arabs as Europeans are different from each other, they only received ambiguous aid from Arab states. This aid sometimes changed to hostility and extermination when the Palestinian movement became too dangerous for them. The Palestinians have suffered all the hellish cycles of history. The consistent failure of all proposed solutions, alliances turning against them in the worst reversals, and the most solemn promises broken. Their resistance was forced to grow from all of those setbacks. One of the goals of the Sabra and Shatila massacres may have been to discredit Arafat. He only agreed to the departure of combatants, whose forces had remained intact, on the condition that the United States and Israel ensure the safety of their families. After the massacres, he could only say, shame. If the crisis that followed for the PLO resulted sooner or later in its integration into an Arab state or its dissolution in Islamic fundamentalism, then the Palestinian people would truly disappear. But then the situation would be such that the United States and Israel would regret all the lost chances, including those that are still possible today. Responding to Israel's boastful statement, quote, "We are not a people like any other," unquote, the Palestinians have repeated their own cry, the one evoked in the first issue of the Red d'Etudes Palestiniens. We are a people like any other. That is all we want to be. By waging a terrorist war in Lebanon, Israel thought it could eliminate the PLO and knock down the pillar of a Palestinian people that had already lost its land. It may have succeeded, since with Tripoli surrounded, there remains only Arafat's physical presence amongst his own, all of them bearing a kind of solitary grandeur. But the Palestinian people will not lose its identity without giving rise to a double terrorism, a state and religious terrorism that will take advantage of its disappearance and make any chance of a peaceful settlement with Israel impossible. The war in Lebanon will leave Israel not only morally torn and in economic disarray, but the country will also have to confront the reverse image of its own intolerance. A political solution, a peaceful settlement, is only possible with an independent PLO, one that has not been swallowed by an existing state or been absorbed by any number of fundamentalist movements. The disappearance of the PLO would only mean the victory of the blind forces of war that care nothing for Palestinian survival.